Kia ora Aotearoa and hello world. You are listening to the Yeah Nah podcast, the official podcast of the New Zealand Skeptics. I'm Bronwyn Rideout, and joining me for another episode are my co-hosts, Mark Honeychurch.
Hey.
And Katrina Borthwick. Now, we have a surprisingly topical-ish episode, I think. Katrina is going to be discussing Trump's Golden Dome missile defense program, which New Zealand Minister of Defense Judith Collin has given a recent endorsement of. Surprising or unsurprising, we'll let Katrina help you decide. From me, I'll be talking about a hot topic. Just a couple weeks ago in Australia, a celebrity there attempted an 11th hour fundraising campaign to freeze her teenage son who had died under some pretty tragic circumstances.
You said this was a hot topic. That's the opposite of a hot topic. This is a freezing cold topic, right?
Yeah. Well, over the next couple issues of the newsletter and the episodes of the podcast, I'll be investigating what cryonics is, some of the past scandals that we've faced in the US, the culture around cryonics, which is generally what you would call a futurist transhumanism that sustains the industry to this day, and of course, New Zealand's place in this very chilly landscape. Mark is cringing because he feels that he's had a much better joke than I did.
You better leave my joke in, because otherwise I think it's just wasted. Like, my talent has just gone to waste.
I think I might let it go to waste as the person who's now doing the editing and script, but if you want that job back, Mark, you can keep your jokes in.
No, thank you.
But first, we have a plan for the next couple episodes of the podcast. I think in about a month's time, we're going to be talking about the Telepathy Tapes. Now, if you have been following Susan Gerbic on Facebook or the Skeptical Inquirer or even David Ferrier's talked about this topic quite recently. The Telepathy Tapes, sort of a podcast series by a documentarian called Kai Dickens. And basically the premise is that non-speaking autistic people have these amazing powers of telepathy. And it's absolute pseudoscience and woo. Surprisingly, the podcast is now being produced for a second series, and apparently Dickens is now going to deepen the claims that non-speaking autistic people have even more paranormal powers, not just telepathy, but also telekinesis. So I wonder if we're going to see any TikTok telekinesis in any of these videos that are hidden behind a paywall.
So I've been listening to this podcast. I'm 4 episodes in, and I think as I messaged you guys a couple of days ago, I was 2 minutes into the first episode when I first started getting really annoyed by it. The bad claims come in thick and fast with this podcast. So I would say to listeners, if you have a thick skin, definitely listen to it and prepare yourself for us having a look into it. But if nonsense annoys you, just don't even try it. Honestly, it's probably going to be annoying enough just listening to us describing it without having to go through hours of listening to people who have obviously no idea what they're doing when it comes to testing claims of the supernatural.
But I think we have to look at it from the other end, and it's important that skeptics do watch these materials because the parents who are being sucked in by whoever's doing these testing, who's ever making these claims, it's quite tragic. There's other services, there's other supports, there's other therapies and other ways that they can support they can support and bond their children, rather than putting them through this whole process, which is just what it's successfully doing, just raising their hope that their child could do something more. And that may not be the case. It's quite sad.
Yeah, but we don't want to give away too many spoilers, but have a listen if you can. Don't have a listen if it's going to frustrate you. And we will pull it apart, and I think we will have a lot of opinions on this one.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, but before we get started, I just wanted to show you something I bought off Temu that I think is awesome, and hopefully our listeners will get to experience it as well in my show and tell. Are you ready, guys? Look at what I bought recently. Look at this beauty.
It looks like a tuning fork.
It is a tuning fork on a box. Can you see the frequency that it's tuned to there?
432.
432 hertz. So I'd just like to ring this to open the podcast. I think it might bring us good luck or something, I don't know. And hopefully, because it's attached to like a hollow box, so I think that helps to amplify it. Let's see if we can get a good 432 hertz node out of this. How's that?
Not
Okay.
good.
I heard nothing.
All right. Let's try it again closer to the microphone. You're
Okay.
What?
No,
Is it not coming
nothing.
through?
Like every now and then we might get a little bit of a light ring, but yeah, I don't know what this script is doing. I don't know what our mics are doing. This is an odd sound.
Really
Okay, that was-
disappointing. Maybe when I'm not speaking, the filter's on. All right, I'm going to have to speak over me making the noise. Here we go. I'm going to keep speaking while I'm making this noise. Can you hear it now?
Yeah, we can hear it now.
Awesome. It must be some kind of active filter that's there.
Shameful.
So I get to heal my family. I started doing it at the beginning of dinner time. I don't think they were very impressed that we had kind of our version of the Lord's Prayer before dinner, me ringing a 432 hertz tuning fork. But I did check it. One thing I did do, because, it's Temu, who knows what the hell I've got, but I did install an app on my phone that tells you what frequency of sound it's hearing. And it is 432.1 or something. It's really close to 432 hertz. But it's not the only one I got either. Let's see if I can find the other ones, because I don't do things by half. So I managed to pick up 3, one of which is more of a body healing one. So we've got this one at 528 hertz. And this one's a gold tuning fork. This one's really nice. So that's a solfeggio frequency. And I'm not sure about this frequency, but it's 136.1 hertz.
Well, that's a bit odd.
So it's a lot lower, but look at the top of it. The top of it's got these little drum thingies on it. And I think this is the one that I've been healed with before, because I've had tuning fork healing. And this one kind of looks more medical because it's got these weird things on the top.
Like, what? Why?
They just stick in the air. I don't know whether they're weights to slow it down. I don't know whether that brings the frequency down, but it's this end. It's the bottom end where the fork comes into one. That's the end that they touch to you when they're healing you, because you feel the vibration through there. I think if they touch the top end with the 2 tines, it would just stop the vibration and you probably wouldn't get much healing. But with the bottom, yeah, so I spent far too much money, maybe $30 on buying 3 healing tuning forks, and I'm really enjoying just how awful they are.
Wow.
Yeah, well, it's a hell of a lot cheaper than, buying some olive trees from a multi-level marketing company.
Yeah, the trouble with MLMs is they just keep asking for more money, don't they? Whereas Temu, I guess it does in its own way, but it's not quite as hassly as most MLMs are.
Well, that $30 would go a long way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you for that show and tell, Mark. But Katrina, let's start off the episode with your piece from the newsletter and Trump's Golden Dome. Tell us about this missile defense program or missile plan that Trump has up his sleeve.
Yes, stumbled on this Golden Dome, and it was an executive order that was done in late January, and I hadn't come across it before. It didn't seem to have a huge amount of media coverage or anything in New Zealand, and he said, I'm going to create an iron dome of defence against ballistic hypersonic cruise missiles and their attacks. So this was renamed Golden Dome for America, and the issue was actually an Israeli defence firm called Iron Dome, so he had to rename it from Iron Dome to Golden Dome. I kind of thought at first it might just be because he's created the office in the White House with gold, and he seems to like gold, and I just thought that was the reason, but it wasn't. Maybe that's why he chose Golden Dome. Was a non-starter, so late February we got Golden Dome for America, and I think the idea is that you have a mixture of satellites and land-based things that can shoot down missiles before they hit your country. So this is his idea, and he said it would cost $25 billion, and it'll be up and running by the time he finishes his term, so 3 years. Put these things up there and on the ground, and if anybody from North Korea, for example, shoots a missile, then boom, this thing would shoot everything down. And it is not NORAD's idea, so it's not the US defense leaders or anything. This is coming from President of the United States himself. It was his idea, so you can't go wrong with that, really. He's obviously an expert in science and things, and he said that the defence leads wholeheartedly agreed. So money's already starting to change hands on this defence system. So Rocket Lab has already bought another company based on the facts that this might be built. They've bought Geost, which is an Arizona firm, for $460 million. And they develop missile warning and tracking and surveillance. But I think there's a big question mark over that right now. I'm not entirely sure whether Trump and Musk are friends. I think Musk has kind of backtracked a bit, but I would just have to say that things are probably not too reliable on that front right now, and whether Elon Musk is going to get the contract for this or not, I'm not sure. But I guess what I was more interested in than the politics behind it was, could this actually work? Could you have enough stuff out in space and on land to actually shoot down any missile that came from anywhere? And I stumbled on this report that was done back in February by the American Physical Society, and they've got a report up online, quite thorough. And they did a visual showing what would actually be required to be in space in order to just shoot down 4 intercontinental ballistic missiles, so ICBMs, from North Korea. So just 4. So if they see more, they're going to need more satellite. So they worked out that in order to stop any missiles, they would need 1,600 space interceptors. That is only if firing decisions were made instantly. So it would obviously need to be made by a computer that would automatically respond with no time delay whatsoever. If you allowed 30 seconds for firing decisions, then you need 2,200 interceptors. And if there were more missiles, you need more. So 10 missiles, you need 5,500 of these things. And so this image is the planet Earth in space, absolutely surrounded by thousands of satellites, all overlapping, because they're all in low Earth orbit and the Earth spins. So if you park your satellite over North Korea, then the Earth spins, it's going to spin away, and so you need another satellite for when that one spins away, and you need another one, because obviously if North Korea are going to fire a missile and there's one puny satellite up there going around that might shoot them down, they are not going to fire their missile when that satellite's directly above them.
So this is basically having so many interceptors, so many satellites that can, I guess, move fast enough to intercept a missile that at any point during the day there are enough of them there that the probability of shooting these missiles down is high enough. And then I guess you're going to have used a bunch of satellites to do that. So then you're going to have to resupply with new ones as soon as, I mean, obviously not all of the satellites will be needed. It'll just be a subset of them, but you're going to have to resupply that as soon as they've been used, presumably.
Oh, yeah, or crash into each other, which seems highly likely. So if thinking of missile, it's not a straight line, so it's not like gunshot. You're looking, quite far away. They go in sort of a parabolic curve or something to go up into the Earth, about 2 to 3 minutes. In outer space, most of the journey is actually in space. And then about a minute, they re-enter the Earth's atmosphere and hit the target. So in terms of opportunities to intercept that, the problem with the 1 minute at the end, it's now coming downwards, it's moving its fastest, and it's really close to the target. So you need something that's probably closer than a minute out. It's got to be closer than that missile because it's going to be moving slower. So, that's not viable. We don't have any viable interception systems for the trajectory back at the end of it. At the start of it, it's just 2 to 3 minutes long. How are you going to get there in time? We haven't yet got the technology built to do the takeoff part either, but you would need a system basically goes, boop, there was the thing, and it needs to be really close, it needs to shoot it. So it basically would need to be above North Korea at that time when that was fired, and then shoot something at it. And again, you've got the problem it's moving away. You've got to build a bunch of satellites or things to shoot it. If it's a ground-based solution, you're actually going to have to build your guns on North Korea, which could be a bit impractical. So you're basically going to need to shoot ICBMs down while they're in outer space. And then that's when you need all these satellites. You need so many of them. And not a 25 billion cost, like Trump said. The projection in this report was sort of 100 to 180 billion, but I've actually seen figures of 300 billion, which I believe is about 500 billion New Zealand dollars. So it is, in order to have something functional that does what he says it would do, possibly, it's going to cost a lot more than what he said, but 20 times more. And it won't be done in 3 years. So I think he'll put something up. Like, I think there will be some rockets that go up and put some stuff in space. But, we haven't actually had any experience of shooting down ICBMs. So when you look at all the wars that have gone on, none of those had ICBMs actually fired intercontinental missiles. So this is a really new thing. And it's shooting something that's moving really, really fast in space. It's like hitting a bullet with a bullet. Only these are moving 7 times faster than a bullet. Also, when you get them in outer space, things start to move kind of the same because there's no weight in space. So trying to work out which piece of thing in space is what you're trying to shoot at and which it's just a piece of junk can be a bit tricky. And if I was a country that was trying to confuse someone, I'd throw a bunch of stuff up there at the same time. That would obviously reduce your chances of hitting the true target, the decoys, and there could be countermeasures and those sorts of things. So
yeah, I think back in the 80s, America pioneered a system called MIRV, Multiple Independently Targetable Reentry Vehicles, which basically means that nuclear missiles these days, it goes up as a single missile, an ICBM, but as soon as it's finished, it breaks into multiple smaller missiles that all adjust their speed and trajectory. So they don't fly all next to each other. They all kind of take slightly different routes to their target. So you end up with one missile maybe splitting into 10 or 20 missiles, which again just makes it a lot harder to track and a lot harder to shoot them all down, right?
Yeah, well, if you have 20 ICBMs, you need more than those numbers, 5,500 things in space. And I think at some point you've got a problem. You've cluttered low Earth orbit with junk. So if one thing goes off course, it could take out quite a few satellites. Also, what happens if you actually want to put some other things in space? You've got to avoid, there's a lot of junk up there already that has to be avoided. And I know, there's really great tech behind it, but putting up more stuff is not going to be helpful. Current ground-based mid-course defence systems, so that's shooting these ICBMs down from the ground. We've got 44 of those currently. There's been about 60% effective in tests, but these were just ideal conditions, so there's no countermeasures or anything like that. And I don't know, even 60%, if a missile was heading towards you, you want a better success rate than 60%, because I just don't feel like that's an effective defense system, really.
No, this whole thing sounds very similar to Reagan's Star Wars, right? It's, that was a project that never actually ended up being a real thing. But the idea at the time was lasers, I think. It was lasers in orbit that would shoot down Russian missiles. And it was infeasible. And I think very quickly people realized that it was just going to be a huge waste of money to build it. And it never actually got built. And I wonder how likely it is that they just won't do anything. As you say, they might do a little something and claim that this is good enough. But yeah, especially if they're thinking about Russia rather than Korea, but presumably Russia is pretty much as well advanced as America is with their nuclear arsenal. It just sounds like it's just not going to work. And so maybe it's there for show. Maybe it's there to try and make people in America feel like there's an external threat that they need to be scared of. But it just doesn't seem like it's a sensible idea at all.
Yeah, and I guess if it did start to happen in reality, which I'm not overly confident it's going to get off the ground. I think there would be some sort of ribbon-cutting ceremony or something might happen. But you actually know if you started doing this, you're going to get an escalation of basically weaponization of space, I think. There's no way that all of the countries in the world are going to be happy with America covering space with, satellites that shoot things. So China and Russia, for example, obviously North Korea, they're a bit smaller, been used as an example in this report. But you can imagine, the attention gets diverted to actually shooting each other's stuff down, like Space Invaders or something, and just and of course, you've got all these satellites from a foreign country that you're not on friendly terms with flying over you. You don't know whether they've got cameras on those. You have no idea. So it just seems like it, at worst could escalate things to a place that is not. I doubt it's going to get off the ground fully. I think there'll be some satellites launched. I think it will be a very small number. There'll probably be some champagne popped around how wonderful the defence system is. But just as I'd sort of finishing this, in comes this article at the top of my Radio New Zealand newsfeed that New Zealand is now supporting this. So it's interesting, isn't it? So we obviously believe, or someone in government believes, that this is a useful thing to support. Maybe they're just making friends, but
or maybe there's money to be made here. Maybe the fact that we can launch satellites from New Zealand means that this might be good for New Zealand's economy. Therefore, it's good to pretend as if it's a good idea.
Isn't there a part of the rocket lab here?
Yes. Yeah, we have a launch site. I think we're already launching some US satellites, and maybe even some US military satellites have already been launched from New Zealand. So, yeah, possibly it's being seen as a way to help the economy.
We don't like nuclear subs, and we're happy with, I don't know.
It's a tough one. I think I might be wrong, but from memory, the US satellites that we've put up so far are satellites that do observations that might be used for drone targeting. And there have already been enough questions about, is it ethical for us to do that? Is it ethical for New Zealand to help America to allow them to target people with drones? But yeah, something this huge, this obtrusive, this seems like a huge other step.
That could be a bit of a problem for us, I think. I mean, I think it would entirely work in terms of being a defence system, but if, someone waves a flag over and makes it appear that it is a thing and we're the ones that are launching this into space, and it doesn't sort of bode well for the relations we've got with some of our trading partners, does it? But anyway, I'm getting into politics.
Yeah, I would just say that we don't necessarily need to launch anything. There are companies in New Zealand, and their job is to get the funding so that people can design the drones. They can design the intelligent tanks that go out to these countries. New Zealand doesn't need to launch anything. There's other things happening in this country on a corporate level in that regard.
Yeah. That is the golden dome.
All right. Thank you, Katrina. So I guess the next topical thing would be my segment looking into cryonics. So yeah, as I said at the top of this show, it's a bit of a sad story regarding an Australian actress named Claire McCann, and her 13-year-old son committed suicide. But that was not why she was making headlines whatsoever. She was really desperately seeking about $300,000 Australian to, what some of the articles have said, they said cryogenically preserve his body within the next few days. And according to the interview that McCann gave with news.com.au, she had discussed cryonics in the past with her son, like several years prior. And it was something that they both wanted to do. And they would be together again. And what were the things that they would want to do in the future? Unfortunately, this tragedy happened with her son. On her Facebook page, she at least had one commenter saying, hey, what's going to happen, if you die? If this does work, your son's going to wake up alone. So she was getting some pushback from people, but she did have a plan, which many of them do, or which, many people who are into cryonics who have planned their deaths in advance. She was like, yep, I'm going to try to get myself frozen as well at some point, or some friends had promised that they would be cryonically frozen as well, just so that he wouldn't be alone and there'd be money for him to go and get some significant counseling after his resurrection.
So this was $300,000 to freeze the boy, but now they're talking about freezing the mother and friends as well. I mean, these costs are escalating pretty quickly, right?
Yeah, and when you look at some of the because what happens with these cryonic companies, they actually are more like memberships or societies. So you are paying in advance. You are getting a second life insurance policy that you're naming the cryonics company as the company who gets the insurance. And I'll explain all this in part 2. People become members of these groups. They pay a bit of an annual fee. It's not an obligation to be cryonically frozen. When you do want to be cryonically frozen, you're putting in $300,000, which is for a combination of maintenance, being frozen, the whole process of all the chemicals going into your body. And as well, it makes sure that you have a bit of a trust available for you 15, 20, no, not 20, but certainly the idea is 50, 100, 200 years in the future, you have this trust set up that A, has taken care of your maintenance, because you can never trust family to keep up the maintenance. That's what cryonics have found out in the past 80 years. Family tend to lose motivation and interest and the funds to maintain any family member being frozen. And yeah, you'll end up having a bit of money available for you when you come out of stasis. So
Compound interest and all that.
Yeah. So it's gotten the financial side of the whole thing has gotten, definitely a lot more sophisticated. But as you said, Mark, it's costs that are just going up. So again, if it was the son and the mother and maybe 1 or 2 friends, that's at least, over $1 million going into freezing 3 to 4 people.
So having talked about this with her son years ago, that's when she should have started joining a club and making payments. But doing it when someone's died is a little bit late.
Yeah, but I mean, to her credit, we really didn't have any cryonics companies in the Southern Hemisphere until about 2024. 2023, 2024, and that's when the first one opened. And that's not for lack of trying. Again, something I'll talk about in the next issue of the newsletter, as well as the next episode of the podcast, is some early attempts made by American investors at multiple points in time to try to build something in New Zealand, like a cryonics laboratory to freeze people in the Southern Hemisphere. So what was built in Australia was called Southern Cryonics, and that was, as I say, pretty much the first known completed operational cryonics facility. The founder was trying to assist McCann in this process, but it's interesting. There is a level of honesty and frankness within cryonics that's kind of surprising. They'll say, yes, we will take in whatever body you give us. So there is a money aspect. It's never going to go away. But they are quite clear sometimes, or say most of the time, with, hey, look, the worse condition that the body's in, the less successful the freezing is going to take. However, we are still going to freeze the body because there's always that possibility that, in the future, there's going to be some sort of science, some sort of medical advancement that will ensure that we can resurrect your child or resurrect your loved one. And either A, we can cure whatever killed them, if it was cancer or AIDS or some other condition, or we can do something with their brain, something like a Black Mirror, San Junipero, floating head, brain in a jar kind of virtual simulation.
So these people, if this works, wake up and their brain in a jar, or they're, mutilated.
It's part of the process. It's something that they understand. Neuropreservation is a lot cheaper than the whole body. The whole body preservation is going to be the $300,000 option, but just preserving the brain is often a lot cheaper. Cryonicists go in knowing that it's going to be a different experience. But this is where the transhumanism aspect comes into it, is that potentially you're going to be given a new body or a cybernetic body. Your head's going to be in an android.
Yeah, a lot of it seems tied to ideas of the singularity and runaway technology, that there will be a point where AI makes new AI that's better, and so there's going to be these huge increases in technological ability. And so, as Bronwyn says, almost anything's possible, like sufficiently advanced technology indistinguishable from magic kind of stuff, which I guess is quite a hopeful thing to hold in your head. I'm not sure how much that's going to reflect reality.
Yeah.
It strikes me a company that's got unproven technology has a high chance of going tits up, which means you're just going to end up being, I think they call it puddle of goo.
Yeah, well, it's happened. That's one of the things I
Right.
talk about in my article. Certainly in the early years of cryonics, where you have largely societies, but you do have a couple companies that did start up in the 60s and 70s. And it's all experimental. You had a company that was building all of these canisters or capsules that people would be preserved in. The man who owned the company was a wig maker.
Right.
And, well, I guess really the place to start is what is cryonics? And, as I said, quite simply, cryonics is where you're freezing people. But the language does get mixed up with cryogenics. But really, cryogenics is a very legitimate branch of engineering that studies the behaviors of materials under low temperatures. And it's really a part of everyday life, like, food transport, vaccine cold storage, and the cryopreservation of, human and animal materials. So, when people talk about freezing their eggs or freezing sperm for fertility purposes, that's cryogenics. That's the outcome and products and advantages and benefits of cryogenics as a study.
And so the term for human bodies is cryonics.
Cryonics. And that's specifically the process of freezing, often at a negative 196 degrees Celsius, and the storage of human remains with the goal of future resurrection. And I think in contemporary cryonic practice, the ideal preservation procedure involves significant pre-planning. But again, even for people who have been devoted cryonicists, who's been member of all these societies for all their lives, who've gotten the second insurance plan, it doesn't always work. And you always have to come up against family members getting a little bit queasy, people's religious beliefs, because not everyone believes that, preserving your body for the potential of future life actually is compatible with a lot of religious beliefs. How do you conceptualize that in a religion that may be pro-life when you want to extend your life?
Yeah, I guess if you thinking, oh, well, you're supposed to go to heaven, then what happens if, where is your soul while you're dead, and what happens?
Yeah, that is a minefield of nonsense.
Yeah. So, but really what happens in terms of that pre-planning, there's a lot of social engineering that's required in terms of coordinating with hospices, funeral homes, doctors, or again, even if one's family is willing to ensure that the deceased body is not autopsied. Because in some places, an autopsy is required, depending on the mode of death. But if you're a cryonicist or you want to be frozen, you want all your body parts, potentially. Or as many of your body parts as you can get. So, making sure your body is as untampered with as possible is important.
And I guess this is something that happens infrequently enough that, medical professionals won't be used to this.
I think maybe a lot more funeral homes are used to it than, say, medical professionals. One of the really interesting facets of companies such as the Cryonics Institute or Alcor, which is they are one of the two major cryonics companies operating in the U.S. currently. They do, particularly Alcor, they do very detailed case reports. Mark, I think I sent you one from several years ago.
Yeah.
And they've been doing these sort of case reports since about the 60s and 70s, where they go through everything. They're quite honest about everything that may have gone wrong. About, hey, this person only kind of told us at the last minute that they were in critical condition. We didn't have the supplies. We tried to get the supplies to them. This person had to be on dry ice for a few days.
Yeah, it was surprising just how honest it was. But I guess legally, it's a dead body. So legally, it's not a person anymore. So probably the rules as to what it's okay to mess up with are very different than while someone's alive.
I think there's certainly more legal red tape that they have to go through to transport a body than it is to transport a brain.
That's an interesting one. Okay, so the brain one just comes with a lot fewer hassles.
Yeah.
Again, when the brain's taken out, it's the rest of the body that's considered the thing that has the rules and not the brain.
So what often happens if they're just taking the brain, often that's kind of amenable to the family because they can just keep the body for funeral or for cremation or burial.
Okay.
That's the compromise.
Right. So people are happy with the body and not thinking too hard about the fact that actually, to all intents and purposes, at least as far as us materialists are concerned, the brain is the person. We've got a body we can bury.
Yeah, but at the same time, sometimes if the condition of the body and the brain are not ideal, some of these companies will suggest, all right, we'll actually preserve some of the tissue in the event of future cloning. Future whole person cloning is possible.
That one was weird to me because it's like, well, you can't clone memories, right? So I don't know what they're planning with the memories. This is not something you get back once you manage to clone someone.
But in some,
they just have kids, if they want little me's, it's just a lot cheaper to get pregnant than,
now if you're 60, 70 years old.
Oh, okay.
There's, certainly in the early years of cryonics in the 60s and 70s, like a lot of people who were getting into it were far older.
Mm. Okay.
So, and it's an interesting process in terms of how these companies work. Some of them offer what they call an SST, which is a standby stabilization or transport service. So that means that depending maybe on the geographical region that you die in, they may be able to send a team of people who will hang around your hometown waiting for you to die. That's so that as soon as you die, maybe they'll be able to use the funeral home facilities. They can start the preservation process as soon as they can and then transport you appropriately to the facilities. However, because this is America, there are other third-party companies that will do the stabilization or at least certainly do the transport process for the storage companies. And then, it may be a bit more of a delay. Your body will deteriorate potentially a little bit more even on dry ice, but then they'll just do the storage and preservation at their headquarters.
The other part of this that I've heard, and I heard it from a member of the SGU podcast who is hoping to have himself frozen and his wife frozen, is apparently when you get to retirement age, there's a thing about moving to a retirement home that's as close as possible to a facility so that there isn't much transport there, that literally within a kilometer or two of where you need to be frozen.
Oh yeah, this is a whole culture of the cryonicists. You're living near certain retirement facilities that are amenable, or you're going in communities where the funeral homes are amenable to that service. All sorts. I think, came across a website for a company that's kind of new to the business, and it looks like they've actually got a bit of a hospice, like a little bit of a hospice facility going on as well. So you can die at the facility. And you're already there.
Handy.
Convenient. This is full service.
Yeah.
But I think there's going to be some cure for old age in the future. But, like you 90, cack it in one of those facilities, get frozen. Best case scenario, you wake up, you're still in your 90s, everything still hurts.
It's, if your cancer can't be cured, if old age can't be cured, then guess what? They're going to give you a new body.
Oh, okay, so new body, you get to start all over again and whatever the future is.
Yeah. And I guess it's going to be kind of the interesting thing is in terms of the difference of how well the cryopreservation works. It's kind of a complex process. There's all these different medications that they have to give your body. Like, you die. And then in a sense, it's a possibility that you could wake up again because the cardiopulmonary system that they need to keep the blood flowing to the brain so the medication can circulate through your body while they try to make sure that your stomach doesn't disintegrate under its own acids at a cold temperature, making sure that your blood doesn't clot. The process, that cardiopulmonary process, is quite intense. And potentially sometimes people claim, they do note that it's a possibility.
It's a weird idea, isn't it? That in the midst of freezing, you wake up for a while and you're aware that this is going on, that you've already died once and that you're being frozen. I don't know what would go through your mind when that happened.
Yeah, I think for that they give propofol as an anesthetic. That helps to sort of, it's for pain, but it also reduces that brain metabolism and that slow recovery of awareness in case you do wake up in that process. And then they'll do a blood washout, which is where the blood is replaced with an organ preservation solution. And they put in the organ preservation solution as a way to help make sure that you don't have too much water when they go through the freezing process. Because if you have too much water, all that water can kind of come together during the freezing process and expand. And that's what can cause the damage to your organs and your blood vessels.
Ice crystals are pretty sharp. They destroy cells, so get it. I'm not sure why we can freeze eggs, no problem, but we can't freeze a whole human. Doesn't work.
So one of the things I did in my article, and I won't badger on too long about it, because the most famous legend of cryonics is Walt Disney. It's kind of the oldest Snopes entry from 1995, probably even before then. And it's still up there regarding the frozen head from an article from 1995. I think it used to be that Walt Disney was chilling underneath the Pirates of the Caribbean. That has been a legend that's been circulating since about 1966. So it's been around for a long time. But of course, as we know, Disney was cremated and buried in Hollywood. However, Ted Williams, the baseball player, and some of his members of his family they have been cryonically frozen. Around the time these legends had come up around Disney, it sort of coincided with the publication of a book in 1964 called The Prospect of Immortality by Robert C. W. Ettinger. And he originally wrote the book in 1962, and it kind of lays out various ideas about it's really an examination of the ethical, legal, and scientific practicalities of freezing humans. Ettinger didn't really have a lot of information about how to make it real. His work caught the attention of Doubleday Publisher, which allegedly handed the manuscript to Isaac Asimov. And it was Isaac Asimov who said, yeah, this seems plausible. But that's the legend. I don't know how much is true. I haven't been able to find... I've only found the story on Cryonic website, and Mensa was one sort of source. I haven't really found anything independent of that. So that made the book a bestseller. So from about 1965 onwards, we have the formation of all these societies and some early companies that were dedicated to cryonics, trying to establish cryonic clubs in high schools and in universities. The reception wasn't really always warm, particularly for a lot of blue-collar Americans who maybe had more Christian backgrounds, Baptist, fundamentalist. They felt that cryonics was not compatible with their Christian belief. Nonetheless, a lot of these groups were trying to get together and figure out a way that how can we support each other to make sure that we're frozen? How can we create and build facilities where we can be frozen? So you end up having about 3 companies emerge. One is CryoCare, which built capsules. And then you had the Cryonic Society of New York, which tried to freeze people, and the Cryonic Society of California, headed by Robert Nelson at one point. And it's the Cryonics Society of California, which ended up being the most infamous. They actually had a very terrible case around the 1980s where it was revealed that they stopped maintaining the capsules that were given to them to care for. The capsules malfunctioned.
Oh.
And it was not a pretty sight because when they used liquid nitrogen to keep it cool, they needed vacuum pumps. And these capsules initially worked well, but the vacuum pump was sort of the part that always malfunctioned. And if you're not going in there and constantly refilling the liquid nitrogen, basically that sort of evaporates. Those capsules actually start to boil.
It feels like relying on an outside source of energy or maintenance. It's not a great idea. Like, you might be better people.
I think in space is good, but of course it costs a lot with a rocket. But there is an idea. So I'm sure you guys have heard of the space elevator and the idea that you have this elevator that can go up and down. It turns out that scientifically it's a hard thing to do, but the easiest version that I've heard of is just this slingshot track. It's kind of almost like a roller coaster where you attach things to it and it goes up and flings them up into orbit, and then the track comes down and it goes round in a circle. Now, for flinging humans, it's not good. I think the G-forces would kill them, but dead bodies, presumably, if this is a cost-effective way of getting things into space and you're not worried about killing a dead body, maybe cryonics people need to look into building one of these and starting to fling the dead bodies. I guess if you get them in an orbit where it comes back round Earth every 50 years, you just kind of pluck them out when you're ready to resurrect them maybe and bring them back down to Earth.
I feel like Golden Dome might meet cryonics at this point.
That James may correct me, but there was an episode in season 1, I think, maybe season 2 of Star Trek: The Next Generation, where they did have a spaceship from the 70s or 80s that was full of frozen people.
Okay.
And then they unfroze them and reintroduced them to, no money utopia. It didn't go entirely well. So yeah, no, your idea, Mark, has come up in science fiction before. So what happened with the Cryonics Society of California is that the owner, Robert Nelson, had a tendency to overpromise. And this is where you kind of get the grift of early cryonics. He would say, I just want to help all these people. All these people came to me needing help, wanting to preserve their family, but he never really had the capsules. So what he would end up doing is that he would just store some of these bodies in the funeral home owned by an ally or a colleague. 3 times someone said, oh yeah, can you take care of this capsule of my son, of my child, or what have you? And what he would do is that he would infiltrate the capsule. He would open them up, put several bodies in the capsule and then seal them back in. And this would be a process that would take several hours to open it, put the bodies back in, and seal it back up. So these were bodies that would end up getting regularly warmed and cooled.
Yeah.
Decompose a little bit.
It's not good for food to keep defrosting it and refreezing it, so I'm presuming it's not good for a human body either.
Yeah. So this is the 70s. Can't really keep track of what the time frame is. It's estimated that, in terms of the 2 or 3 capsules that Bob Nelson was keeping in this vault that he owned, he maybe stopped taking care of the capsules himself in 1976. There was one man who was taking care of the capsule that his son was in until 1979. By 1980, it was revealed that, everyone who was buried in this particular vault in these capsules were in terrible condition. And that's what became known as the Chatsworth scandal. And, if you're reading about cryonics, you will come across this case. So I think that's kind of where we end off in terms of the early years of cryonics. And so within part 2, going to look at what's happened since, which is the growth of Alcor, the building up of this culture, particularly, I guess what you and I noted was it's very tech bro-y now. It's not fully embraced, but certainly on the fringe of a lot of these pseudoscientific treatments and procedures.
Yeah.
Things that people are doing to extend their life.
Yeah, the extreme life extension people that are injecting themselves with 8 different chemicals every day, including the blood of their own son and so on and so forth.
Well, yeah.
But this was something, I think it was in the Alcor documents. One of the files was about how do you really extend your life? And it is about your health, making sure you have good health as much as you can at the time of your death, that you're eating well, that you're exercising, because the better the condition that your body's in, that bodes far better for your chance at reanimation in the future.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like cryonics is we're nowhere near the technology that's needed, and how do you bridge that gap?
And they accept that. They accept that. I came across, was it the Atlantic or GQ? And was it Saul Kent, or was it Ettinger, or was it some third person? But they put up a table, and it's like, what's the risk in terms of cryonics not working? If it works, great. If it doesn't, well, you've lost a bit of money and you're still dead.
Yeah. My perspective...
So it's kind of like a table that sometimes you see with God. What's the risk of believing in God? If he doesn't exist, well, you're dead. If he is, awesome, you win, Yeah,
the Pascal's wager. The thing that I can't get out of my head, it's always been there with cryonics, is I think the arrogance that these people, just because they've made enough money that they can afford it, the arrogance that they are the people that should be frozen and defrosted. Because I'm pretty sure the average man who's made good money from selling wigs or running a spreadsheet company or something like that isn't the kind of person that the future needs. There are a bunch of people that maybe we should be freezing, and maybe the people that have this money should be thinking about picking someone who's more worthy than them to freeze, rather than arrogantly thinking that they're the people that should be the recipients of this. Like, there's a bunch of scientists that maybe might be more use in the future, or maybe art historians or something like that. I don't know. But yeah, I get the feeling that these people aren't the ideal candidates if we could all choose.
Well, technically, something like that is allegedly happening. Wasn't there that sperm bank that was collecting sperm samples allegedly from all the Nobel Prize winners?
Oh,
the Genius Sperm Bank?
This sounds like something for another article. You this and I will read it.
Great.
Yeah, I watched that documentary.
And really, it's just the one doctor.
That one doctor that used his sperm for that weird, really weird.
Well, we'll have to make sure that they're two different stories, but yeah.
I've got a crazy idea. If you've got all this extra money, you could use it to help living people stay alive, like people in underprivileged nations or something.
I guess the question is, do they actually have the money? Is the money actually ever that? Because it certainly wasn't for Bob Nelson. Like, one of his claims about, this is the reason why, he's like, I took care of all these capsules for an extra year and a half, even though none of the family members were paying the fees or the maintenance fees.
Or just hogs.
Yeah. We'll come to a point where even if you do have that trust or investment scheme where people come in with $300,000 in the bank and you're getting so much in interest each month or each year, I mean, they'll come to a point with inflation that's not really going to be sufficient to cover the fees.
It sort of feels like you're 200 years ago drawing a picture on a piece of paper going, hey, one day they're going to invent a thing called an iPhone and this will work one day. And, it's just so far away. It's not there. I don't know. I mean, is this a good way of testing whether cryo works? I think normally in science you start with smaller things, not whole.
Yeah, or at least you get to the point where you're able to actually resurrect an entire person or an entire animal after they've been gone through the vitrification process and they're frozen solid for a bit. You would have done that first, usually.
Yeah, maybe a mouse or, a firefly or, just something, a zebrafish. They like testing on zebrafish. Mm-hmm. Maybe if you could do that, then I think you can start to move on to more complex things. It just feels like it's really wishful thinking. And of course, it's that whole thing of, that quest for immortality.
Scared to miss out.
It feels predatory. And the mother who failed to raise the $300,000, is she now feeling guilty that she couldn't get the money?
It's hard to say. Like initially when she was interviewed, she's like, I can't even comprehend what I'll do if I need to bury my son. But it seems that somehow when it became clear that it wasn't going to work out, she's like, okay, she lowered her GoFundMe and she's like, I need to pay for the funeral and then we're going to have a memorial. And if I have more money than that, I'm going to put together a trust and it's going to be an anti-bullying campaign. And she was also going to have legal action against the school because the bullying that her son faced was related to his education. But I guess, interestingly enough, I believe she is Catholic, and she did have links to Carlo Acutis' website. And if maybe a few months ago, I talked about Carlo Acutis as the first Catholic saint of the internet.
I've got a business idea here, which is that we set up a company that offers cryonics in New Zealand. We would be the first in New Zealand. But what we actually do, because looking at the pictures you put in the newsletter, Bronwyn, they wrap everybody in tinfoil or aluminium foil. Mylar. It's mylar foil. So I figure we just wrap mannequins and stick them in these dewars, and then we go and spend the money on philanthropy. We actually go and spend it, as Katrina says, helping people that need help. We'll just lie to the families and tell them that, yeah, that's not a shop mannequin. That's definitely your mother that's there frozen. Then we don't even have to freeze it, right? We could pretend we're pumping liquid nitrogen in, but we can avoid all the costs of actually keeping these things frozen. Maybe a little bit of dry ice for effect, and we can just have that little kind of cold smokiness hanging around. I reckon we could pull this off.
No, we can't, because you don't even want adverts on the podcast.
That's true.
Unethical. I don't think you're going to start faking dead bodies in a hurry.
This would require a level of promotion, Mark, that I think you are personally ethically unaligned with.
But this is Robin Hood stuff. This is taking money from the rich and giving it to the poor. I think I can ethically justify this. I think I'm going to be okay with this one. And with the New Zealand Skeptics branding, I'm sure everybody would trust us, right? Because we're very honest. We like to expose people that cheat. We couldn't possibly be cheating ourselves.
Yeah.
Now you've stuck it on a podcast and broadcasted it.
All right, Bronwyn, scrub this bit.
Plan.
Lose it all.
No, because this is about the starting small. Let's not get too big for our britches. So stay tuned for our further investigation over the next couple of weeks. But until then, we're just going to close off the podcast with a bit of a membership corner. Next Skeptics in Cyberspace is June 20th. The link is in the show notes, as well as on our Facebook page and various meetup groups.
Oh, we might be changing that. So we're looking at migrating off of Zoom.
Right.
We've already had some strong opinions about Microsoft Teams shared within the committee, but we're looking, because we can get Microsoft Teams for free, at shifting across to having our cyberspace meetings there. So if you are someone that comes to the cyberspace meetings and usually just clicks on the link that you've saved, just make sure you check the meeting in case we have changed the link to be using Teams instead of Zoom.
And then for people who were the fans of the Global Skeptics in the Pub last year, it's happening again. The date to mark in your calendar is August 22nd, and we will have further details as they become available. It was a great time, got to meet lots of skeptics from around the world, and it was a pretty good event.
It was an interesting meeting, and yes, some tired people in the States at the end of the 24 hours were...
Yeah. And they still had a conference to go to as well.
Oh, yeah. Yes, because it was to kick off their conference, wasn't it?
So in terms of our national in-person events, in Wellington, we will have Skeptical Activism in the Pub on Thursday, June 19th. Mark, do you want to tell our listeners a bit more about what you guys are up to there at the moment?
As I said at our last podcast... Oh, actually, we didn't even talk about the fact that our last podcast was a week late, but...
We don't need to talk about that.
Okay, let's not talk about it. Hopefully nobody noticed, but gosh, talking about it already. So as I said in the last one, we're basically working on our plagiarism project. We have a renewed vigor for getting it finished off. We have some ideas on how we can use an LLM to help with some of the work that is fairly manual at the moment, but we would like to automate. And yeah, so we're doing a bunch of work on that project. So if you'd like to come along and help out or just gawk and see what we're doing, come along to the Fork and Brewer on Thursday from 6 p.m. and we'd love to see you there.
Alrighty. And then the regular Skeptics in the Pub is going to be on June 27th at the Intercontinental Hotel. That's going to be starting at 6 p.m. Always a great time with great food, great drinks, and great company. Auckland, Skeptics in the Pub will have their next meeting on Tuesday, July 1st at the Dice and Fork, with their meeting starting at 6:30. Now, aside from listening to the podcast and all of our fine podcast platforms, you can also now listen to us on our YouTube page. If you didn't know we have one, now you do. So visit www.youtube.com/@skepticsnz and add us to your playlist. There are videos from conferences past, including Susan Gerbic, Mark Edward, the amazing James Randi, Richard Saunders, Steve Novella, and others. So there's plenty for you to enjoy while you wait for our next episode. If you have any comments, questions, concerns, queries, or kudos, please email us at either podcast@skeptics.nz or newsletter@skeptics.nz. And guess what? You all have your homework to listen to the Telepathy Tapes over the next month.
Yeah, sorry for that, but really, go and do it and get annoyed like I'm annoyed.
Alrighty, you've been listening to the Yeah Nah podcast, the official podcast of the New Zealand Skeptics. We hope to see you next time. Ka kite.
Bye.
See ya.